All right, so let's begin with an introduction. My name is Ama Karikari-Yawson, and I am an author and a diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging speaker and consultant. The name of my company is Milestales, and I formed Milestales some years ago to publish books surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to also teach on that subject. I do many conferences. I am a lawyer by training. I worked at Citigroup Inc. and Cleary Gottlieb Steen and Hamilton before starting my own company. I also have my JD is from the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and my MBA is from the Wharton School. Additionally, I am a performance storyteller, and I often speak at a number of conferences, legal conferences for continuing legal education. I often speak at conferences at nonprofits, and I did a program at a nonprofit, and someone from this esteemed organization saw me and said, we would like you to share it with our audience as well. So I hope that you all are enjoying it and that you are doing great. I'm going to share my screen in a moment, and we are actually going to begin. I'm going to perform a story for you, and then we're going to discuss seizing your power to really make a difference in the ways that you can within the sphere of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So let me make sure that my technical work is being done because I'm going to share my screen. Thank you so much. The screen sharing has begun. Let's start with the slideshow. So we're seizing our power to create a more inclusive community. I've already introduced myself. I'm going to engage in some storytelling for you. We're going to go through some diversity and inclusion definitions, make sure we're all on the same page. We're going to discuss understanding institutional racism, then understanding implicit bias and microaggressions, and then we're going to get to the heart of the matter, which is seizing your power, and then we will have a conclusion. So I hope you all are ready for a really dynamic. This is a topic that's often uncomfortable for people, and we are going to have some discomfort, but we are also going to have some engagement and some learning, and I would say some release of some tension. And so that is really important. So as I may have mentioned to you before, I am a storyteller. I am an author and a storyteller. So I often perform stories at programs because I believe that stories allow us to understand topics in a better way. That is what inspired me to become a storyteller. I wanted to teach lessons in a way that was engaging and interesting. So I'm actually going to perform this story for you, Sune's Gift, how Sune overcame bullying to reclaim the gift. This is my first book that came out. There's now a sequel to it, Earth Day's Gift, and I've published many other books. You can look up my name on Amazon and see those books and read those books, and I would appreciate that. And all of the books that I write have themes of diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as social emotional learning and being our best self. So are you all ready for a dynamic story? I hope that you are. I'm going to go in the chat because I want to see what you all are saying, right? Great. I want you to tell me in the chat that you're ready for a story. I know some people think that adults are not, capable of story time. They think that we're too cool as adults for story time, but I need you to put in the chat that you're ready for a story. I need your permission. Thank you, Kate, so much for sharing your amazing energy with us. Kate, I see that you wrote that. Thank you very much. And I love seeing it in the chat because when you're doing a webinar and you're not seeing people with Zoom, it's like, oh, am I here by myself? So I don't want to be here by myself. I want to be here with you. So come on now. Deborah, Kate, ready for a story? Kate says ready. Sean says ready. I love it. Okay, so I'm going to start this story with a call and response from my family's home country of Ghana in West Africa. Now, in Ghana and West Africa, when we tell a story, we don't jump into the story. We start with the call and response. The call is I'll go. I'm going to put it in the chat. I'll go. AGOO. That's the call. I'll go. And your response is I may. I say I'll go, then you say I may. We do that 2 times, then we have a moment of silence. So I say I'll go, type in the chat, I may, please. I'll go. I may. I'll go. I may. In the beginning, the planet of Wiasi was not as it is today. There was no sun to bring forth warmth or light. There was no earth from which fruits, vegetables, or flowers could grow. There was no water water to quench the thirst of the living, and there was no wind to transport seeds or cause a refreshing breeze. Now, the creator of the planet was named Niami, and Niami became very bored with the barren planet. So in an instant, and with just a thought, Niami created the sun, the earth, the water, and the wind, and everyone. It was beautiful. Lush vegetation was growing from the brilliant earth, and you could see the beautiful vegetation, and you could hear the water flowing and breezes blowing. Good. So good. Niami said, I'm going to make children to help me take care of this world. So in an instant, and with just a thought, Niami brought forth 4 children. They were magical beings called Magbies. Their names were Sune, Earthay, Watre, and Winde. Niami began to address the Magbies. Sune, you are imbued with the power of the sun. For this reason, your skin is sun-dark and red, and your hair grows in spirally twist toward the sun. Take care of yourself, because the power of the sun is within you. The next child was Earthay. Niami said, Earthay, you are imbued with the power of the earth. For this reason, your skin is brown, and your straight hair grows down toward the soil. Take care of yourself, because the power of the earth is within you. The next child was Watre. Niami said, Watre, you are imbued with the power of water. For this reason, your skin is translucent green, and your straight hair flows down your back like water. Take care of yourself, because the power of water is within you. And the last child was Winde. And Niami said to Winde, Winde, you are imbued with the power of the wind. For this reason, your skin is translucent gray, and your straight hair blows with the breeze. Take care of yourself, because the power of the wind is within you. Niami then said, you are all my children, made in my image. Honor each other and honor each other's gifts. So these 4 Magbies were very responsible. They had to make the sun rise and set, to put nutrients into the soil, to make it rain, and to make the wind blow. As they would do their dances, they would sing this song, and you can sing from your chair over there. This is the song. Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. One more time. Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. One more time. Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. So Sune had to do the wave dance to make the sun rise and set. So Sune went, Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. Now Earthay had to do hip circles to put nutrients in the soil. Earthay went, Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. Watre had to do finger jiggles to rain, to make it rain. Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. And Winde had to blow out gaseous gusts to blow seeds to new places. Winde went, Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. Now in their spare time, the 4 Magbies would climb trees. They'd play hide and seek. They would also sing, Primpranana, Primpranana. We are having so much fun. Primpranana, Primpranana, taking care of the world for everyone. But then one day, the 4 Magbies traveled to a river. And when they traveled to the river, they looked at their reflections for the first time. As they looked at their reflections, it occurred to them that Sune, the sun child, had different hair. You see, while Earthay, Watre, and Winde all had hair that grew straight down, Sune's hair stood tall. So at first, Earthay was confused about the difference and said, I wonder why Niami gave Sune the different hair. Now, Winde was jealous and wanted to be the one with special hair. So Winde blurted, Sune, your hair is ugly. Your spirally twists look absolutely ridiculous. Now, Watre knew that Sune's hair was beautiful, but did not want to feel left out. So Watre said, yeah, Sune, your hair is really weird. Sune's heart sank. Tears formed in Sune's eyes. Sune didn't want to be different, ugly, ridiculous, or weird. So Sune picked up a stick and began to beat every spiral of hair to make it straight. And with each slap, Sune felt weaker. But Sune continued as the other Magby sang, "You must, you must. It's worth the fuss. Soon you will look like the rest of us." But when the last spiral of Sune's hair became straight, all of Sune's hair fell out. The sun disappeared and darkness descended upon the land. Sune, Earth, Water, and Wind looked at each other and that's not the whole story, but we have only 45 minutes, so I'm not telling you the whole story. But I need you to put in the chat that even from the first half, what do you believe the moral of the story is? Think about the story. We have Sune, Earth, Water, and Wind representing the sun, the earth, the water, and the wind. Now we have Sune looking different. And when Sune tries to conform, what happens? What do you believe is the moral of that story? I need you to put it in the chat. Someone tell me. I do this performance at schools, at universities, at corporations, and sometimes preschoolers are able to tell me, what is the moral? Even from the first half, we see what happens to Sune. What is the moral of the story? What lesson is there for children, for adults, and for all of us as we navigate our changing society and the issues of diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging? Someone please put in the chat, what is the moral? I know there's a little lag, so I'm going to wait for a moment. What do you believe is the moral of the story? What exactly is it that you believe is the lesson to be learned? All right, very, very good. I'll let you all put that in the chat, and then we're going to move on because we do not have much time. So, what does this story mean? Most of us are interested in a diverse national and global community in which human beings are able to thrive and use their gifts and talents for the benefit of the world, regardless of their race, their religion, their nationality, their ability, their gender, their neural wiring, and other.
Sometimes we have challenges, right? So let's first define these terms. Diversity.
The state of possessing unlikeness with respect to any dimension that can be used to create a distinction between human beings. So I say this to say that although very often, and I have a focus on racial diversity and equity and inclusion, I want us to know that diversity is much broader than that. It deals with biological sex, gender or gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, race. And I put race in quotes because it's a social construct, not a biological construct. We could decide that we're just going to have the brown skin races or brown and darker races and light races. And in that case, someone from Bangladesh would be considered the same race as me, whose ancestry is from Ghana. But we have not delineated that, right? We could say we're going to have the curly haired races and the straight haired races. In that case, some of my Jewish friends from Eastern European who have very kinky curly hair would be as part of the same race as me. And that person from Bangladesh with straight hair would be the same race as someone from Europe with straight hair, right? So we have decided what lines, but these lines are arbitrary, right? We have ethnicity or nation of origin. We have immigration status. We have skin tone or hair texture, religion or ethical system, political beliefs, parental status or marital status, age. I mean, these are all reasons or all elements of diversity, educational background, mental ability or brain wiring, physical ability or attributes, personality traits, right? All of these issues are issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you for your comments on what the story means. Sean Slevin, respect each other, work with one another. Thank you. Appreciate it. Garrett, everybody love everybody. Thank you for those phenomenal literary interpretation of what the story means. Great job. Thank you. Okay, so now I would like us to do a poll. Kelly, can you kindly put in the poll? When we think about issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, the question is, how comfortable are you discussing these in your workplace? I remember when I was first starting out and working, my first job was investment banking at Bank of America Securities out of college. The rule was, don't say anything about anything. Don't talk about religion. Don't talk about race. Don't talk about gender. Don't talk about family. Just talk about baseball, right? You remember this? Do you remember this time? I mean, I hope that was in, when did I graduate from college? 2002. In 2002, that was the rule. Are you still abiding by that? And so are you comfortable or are you not comfortable discussing those issues? We just put that slide up with respect to all those elements of diversity. I want you to submit, and I would love to see these poll results. How comfortable are you? Because I often tell my clients, we have to get more comfortable speaking about these issues, because if we have only these superficial conversations about baseball and golf and where you summered over the weekend or what have you, we really are not going to get to the heart of the matter. So I'm so curious to see. So we'll see when the poll results come out. Okay, great. All right, most people are in between. We have 11.11% saying not comfortable. We have 77.78% saying somewhat comfortable. And we have 11.11% very comfortable. Okay, well, congrats to those. Thank you for, one, filling this out. Thank you for sharing. Very, very interesting. So somewhat, and I'm sure of that somewhat, some of you are saying, hey, I'm comfortable about speaking about some things, but not others. You might be comfortable about speaking about parental status or caregiving status, but not comfortable about talking about race. You might be comfortable about talking about gender and gender identity, but not comfortable about discussing ability, right? And so we all want to make sure that we are stretching ourselves to get more comfortable. Why? All right? Because we want to create an inclusive environment. Inclusion is defined as the extent to which the inherent value of diverse individuals is acknowledged and the degree to which diverse individuals are welcomed, accepted, integrated, empowered, or equitably treated within a group, organization, or institution. So why do I say that we need to be comfortable sharing? In order for someone to feel as if they belong, they want to know that all aspects of them are welcomed. So I recently read, it's Pride Month, we're still in June, that there are so many individuals who are hiding their sexual identity at work. That does not make the person feel included. You cannot feel included if you're there hiding. If every time, with Zoom, you come up with your Zoom background and you make sure the pictures of your partner are gone. Don't say anything while I'm on my Zoom call, because I don't want them to hear your deep voice and know that as a man, I'm with another man. I don't want them to hear your voice and know that as a woman, I'm with a woman. We do not want that. We do not want that at all. We want to make sure that we are openly discussing things and people feel free sharing all aspects of their identity so that they will be comfortable. And now let's define equity, right? Because I said that we would define these things. The state of fairness and similar opportunity for distinctly positioned individuals. This presupposes natural justice, fair conduct, and impartiality with respect to outcomes for individuals with unique backgrounds. So let me stop sharing for a moment and let's actually discuss what this term means, because it's thrown around. So when you're thinking about your organization, you want to make sure that your organization is diverse in that you have people of different ages. You have people from different racial backgrounds, people of different ethnicities, people who have, some are parents, some are not, because this really, in many cases, helps you to create an organization that's able to serve the needs of your constituents better, because there are people who represent your constituents within your organization that can advocate. They can say, no, you shouldn't do this event at this time because working parents wouldn't have enough time to go home, cook dinner, and then be at the event. You need that type of perspective, right? So you want to make sure that you have an organization in which you have this wonderful representation. But that's not enough. Seeing this beautiful, United Colors, UN type image is not enough, because you will not be able to maintain that unless you are engaging in the work of inclusion. The people are not just there. They're invited to meetings. They're invited to leadership events. They are able to really fully embrace the organization and be embraced. That is the inclusion. At the party, you're dancing at the party. And then we have equity, which is making sure that these diversely situated individuals all have the opportunity to thrive, right? So you think about ability and handicap access. You can't invite someone to a party who's in a wheelchair and say you've done your part if there's no ramp, right? You need to make sure that you actually have the devices and the accommodations necessary to make sure that diverse individuals thrive. And so that is going to vary based on the diverse dimension that we're speaking of. right? So I know that there's some organizations that may not give parental leave or may not give a large number of parental leave days. That is a part of creating equity, because if you want women who are of childbearing age and men who are of childbearing age and able to have families, right? You want them to be able to go, take that time out, care for their new baby, and be able to come back, right? So that's an issue of equity. Look at all of those dimensions. I'm going to go back to my screen sharing, because remember, I shared all of those dimensions. When you are thinking about equity within your organization, you must think about what are the accommodations necessary for all of these different elements of diversity. And this is just a brief summary, everyone, right? We literally can go on for days about diversity and the different dimensions. All right. So I hope that that makes sense to you all. And I'm going to go back to the chat. Do these definitions make sense? Because I know these terms are always DEI, DEIB. People are just throwing these terms around without potentially explaining them. Diversity, these people from diverse backgrounds are actually invited. They are members of the organization. Inclusion, they are actually embraced. All aspects of their identity are embraced. They're able to take on leadership roles. They feel as if they are welcome and that they belong and that they're there for a reason and that they are not just being tokens. And then equity, they're given the accommodations necessary to thrive based on their unique situations. Put in the chat. Are you understanding this? Does this make sense? Is this a good explanation? I need to know what is going on in your minds. Please put it in the chat. All right. So, I mean, the list of why diversity, equity, and inclusion is taking center stage has gone on. But initially, during 2020, it was the death of George Floyd, the death of Ahmaud Arbery, the death of Breonna Taylor. We had the Black Lives Matter movement. I need to update the slide to the Stop Asian Hate movement, that we've seen all of this going on. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion are center stage, right? There is, I would say, and I should update this slide, a special focus on anti-Black racism, anti-Asian racism, institutional racism, and both explicit and implicit bias, right? So when most people think of institutional racism, they're thinking back, right, to pre-1954 Brown versus Board of Education. They're thinking, you know, the civil rights movement, in which you actually had institutional racism. There were rules, a white water fountain versus a colored water fountain. People usually think of this, and very often they think, oh, isn't that over? But that's not it, right? So let's define institutional racism. It is the systemic distribution of resources, power, and opportunity in our society to the benefit of people who are white and the exclusion of people of color. Present-day racism was built on a long history of racially distributed resources and ideas that shape our view of ourselves and others. It is a hierarchical system that comes with a broad range of policies and institutions that keep it in place, and it still exists today. So these are some of the examples that I often give about how it shapes our world at this moment. So local, state, and federal housing policies mandated segregation. There's a wonderful book that discusses this called The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. In it, the author notes that the FHA, or Federal Housing Administration, which was established in 1934, actually promoted segregation by refusing to insure mortgages in American neighborhoods. This was a policy known as redlining, meaning that they would not insure mortgages in or near African American neighborhoods. And so can you imagine that the values of those neighborhoods were exceedingly limited if mortgages couldn't be insured there, right? And at the same time, while they were divesting from African American communities and neighborhoods, they were subsidizing builders who were mass producing subdivisions for whites, right? In places like Levittown. And the requirement of that subsidy was that none of the homes be sold to African Americans. Can you imagine this? Okay. And we're living with this. And so people who were in white neighborhoods got these subsidies. Now these homes are easily worth $700,000, $800,000. And that has helped white families to build wealth. And as a result, the net worth of a typical white family is $171,000, which is 10 times that of a typical Black family. Then we can think of another policy, which is institutional racism. This is in criminal justice. You have the drug war policy that deeply affected the Black populations because there was a 100-to-1 disparity in sentencing for crack, which was popular in Black neighborhoods, versus powder cocaine, which was popular in white neighborhoods. Now, these are essentially the same subject, the same object. the same material, the same drug. However, disproportionately, people of African descent were being sent to prison for a very long time because of it. 100-to-1 disparity, everyone. Can you imagine? And this obviously has a horrifying impact on communities. People are gone. They're incarcerated. More so than that, you have a health disparity in jails. People are 5 times more likely to get HIV, AIDS in jails than they are on the outside. So when these people are finally released, they were then infecting their loved ones. I mean, the repercussions of this policy, we can go on and on and on about the damage. I want to look in the chat, okay? How do you balance being open to inclusion and diversity while also respecting that some people prefer to maintain their privacy? I really appreciate that question, Kate. Thank you. So I think that this is a situation by situation case where this is what I recommend that people do. If you are someone who's comfortable, you share. And sometimes that encourages or enables others to share aspects about their own lives. But if they don't wish to share, we respect that. So I may say to someone, oh, I'm married with 2 kids. How about you and your family? So very often, because I've already shared, I'm married with 2 kids, they feel comfortable sharing about their family. Or I identify as a Black woman who's Ghanaian American of Ghanaian descent. How do you identify? Right? So I've already outed myself. So now very often people feel more comfortable, but if they don't feel comfortable and they're silent, that is fine. That is absolutely fine. It is a work in progress. And some people are more private than others. And some people are also more scared than others. They're afraid to reveal these items because in the past they may have suffered negative repercussions. And we have to respect that. Excellent question, Kate. I really appreciate you. All right, so we're moving on. So let's think about all of these disparities because later we're going to talk about our own power to get over these disparities. So I already mentioned the wealth gap. This is from CNN. I think it's a really powerful indicator of the wealth gap. We have the 171,000 on one side, so 17,600. This is a huge difference that has taken hundreds of years to create. And we pray it will not take hundreds of years to be able to ameliorate, right? So this is the wealth gap. And we said that there are many policies, of course, Jim Crow, slavery, the housing policies, the criminal justice policies that all impact this difference, right? Look at the difference of income. So this is very interesting. You see the legacy of the historical policies and the current day policies through the difference in wealth. Income has a gap. That gap is not nearly as large as the gap with respect to wealth. Unemployment, we see this gap with respect to unemployment, with Black unemployment being at about 16.7% versus white unemployment being at 14.2%. Poverty, we have the Black rate of poverty. And of course, this makes complete sense given what I've told you. If you have a net worth of 171,000, it is easier not to be in poverty than a net worth of 17,000. Because this means as soon as a person gets unemployed, the person has such a low net worth, they will find themselves in poverty very easily. It's very easy to finish $17,000 if that's the only cushion that you have. Extremely easy, especially some of us live in the Northeast. Oh my goodness, people have easily, their household takes $5,000, $6,000, $10,000, $15,000 to run for them to pay their mortgage, pay their electricity bill. It can happen so easily that they are able to exhaust those funds, plunge into this big picture. Healthcare. Oh my goodness, look at the disparity with respect to healthcare, with respect to health insurance, with 10%, nearly 10% of Black people lacking health insurance as opposed to 5.4%. Again, we can partially attribute all of that to the gap in wealth and the gap in employment. Most people get their insurance through their employers. If there's a gap in employment, right, then will also be a gap with respect to health insurance. Additionally, if there's a gap with respect to net worth, there will surely also be a gap with respect to health insurance, because if someone loses their job and they have money, they're able to have private insurance. They're able to extend their private insurance, right? So all of this makes sense. And unfortunately, this is the history. Recently, with the COVID-19 crisis, we've seen the horrors as well. 23% of COVID-19 deaths for Black people, even though they're 13% of the population. And, I'm going to be vulnerable with respect to all of you. I'm going to be vulnerable. I lost my mom to COVID on February 9th. And it was a horrifying experience. She was on a ventilator for 5 weeks. And we prayed and we prayed and we prayed and we worked and we worked and we worked. We, literally up until the last moment, we were emailing researchers. We emailed 60, 70 researchers in order to find some sort of cure for her. We even sued her hospital. And the lawsuit, we paid the retainer for the lawsuit. Our lawyers were supposed to go in front of a judge to get a court order in order for her to be given an experimental drug. Can you imagine? They were supposed to meet the judge at 12:30 and she passed at 10:30. So we never got to see whether that drug would work, but we worked our tails off. It was a horrifying experience, the most horrifying experience of my entire life. And the racial dynamic haunts me to a certain extent. So as I mentioned earlier, I attended the Wharton School. So the other day, the Wharton School of Business of University of Pennsylvania, the other day, some girls in my cohort, like my group, my class at Wharton, said, oh, let's have a Zoom chat and link up. And this was about a month after my mother's passing. And we go on the Zoom chat and there were only two women of African of African descent on the call. Myself, who's Ghanaian American, and then a young lady who is Dominican. So she could check. She's Dominican, so her statistics probably fall in the of Hispanic origin box, but she's of African descent, of visible African descent. Out of, let's say, 18 girls on the call or 18 women on the call, can you imagine when it came to who had experienced a COVID loss, a close COVID loss? It was only the two of us. Only the two of us. Again, I was meeting with a nonprofit client of mine, and I was discussing, health. It's a science-related nonprofit, and I was discussing the horrible politicization of COVID-19, because although I am liberal, when my mom was sick, I looked out for many non-liberal sources for information. I felt like the right had more of a focus on finding a cure for COVID, while the left was more focused on vaccinations. These are broad generalizations, but this was just what I found in my research. And so I was discussing that politicization. Maybe there are 5, 6 of us on the call. And when I shared that my mother passed from COVID, it was only the other Black person, everyone else was white, who said, actually, your story sounds similar. I lost a cousin. So I find myself in these circles where I'm living that horrible statistic about the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on people of African descent. So that is the horror. So we are all a part of this, right? So many of you may be saying, hey, Amma, I'm not a part of institutional racism. You may say, you go back, you say, oh, this housing legislation from 1934, I wasn't even alive back then. I had nothing to do with that. You may say the criminal justice, 100-to-1 disparity, I have nothing to do with that. You may say wealth, okay, I may benefit from it, but I have nothing to do with that. Income, you may say I'm not employing people, la, la, la. You get the idea. You may say that I have nothing to do with this. However, I would like us to realize that all of us are a part of this, because all of us also have bias. So besides the explicit institutional racism that we're discussing, there's also an implicit bias that we all had. These are the subtle and unconscious attitudes and beliefs that a person, organization, or institution holds towards an individual or group. Very often, that implicit bias is based on stereotypes, widely held but fixed and oversimplified images or idea of a particular type of person or thing. And this is the interesting thing about implicit bias and underlying beliefs. They often do not coincide with declared or conscious beliefs. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can really be with you at this time and discuss this. All of us have biases. All of us. I give people the example all the time, and we'll discuss this in a few seconds when we talk about microaggressions. I tell this story. When I was working at Cleary, there was a friend of mine named Ian, and I saw Ian at our Friday social. How are you? What's going on? And he said, oh, all is well. I'm getting married. I said, I'm so excited for you, Ian. Who's the lucky lady? What was I assuming? I was assuming that he was marrying a woman. Why? Because I have a bias, a heteronormative bias. Generally, when I think of men marrying, I think of men marrying women. When I think of women marrying, I think of women marrying men. And I show that bias towards heterosexuality. And Ian responds, it's actually a man. I said, even better. And then we continued our conversation. But I'm going to give you this example to say we all have biases. I can give you tons of examples. Every day we have this thought process. Every day we think about these things. So let's continue to discuss it. We all have these biases. And they come out in various ways, right? These are some of the common stereotypes. Like I remember being at a party and I met a young lady who attended Stuyvesant. And somehow we started speaking about football. And she made a comment, Stuyvesant, of course, is bad at football because Asians and Jews would make a bad football team. She said this in public at a dinner party. Stereotype. Why should someone not be athletic because they're Asian or Jewish? We're watching the Olympics in Tokyo, right? There are plenty of phenomenal Asian athletes, right? And there are plenty of phenomenal Asian American athletes, and there are plenty of phenomenal Jewish American athletes. Are there no athletes in Israel? Like, give me a break. This is the sort of bias that people have. These are the sort of biases that people have that come out very often. And very often these come out as microaggressions, right? So these are comments that people make that show you that they have this sort of bias and they have these sort of beliefs. And all of us are guilty of these things. So when I said to my friend Ian, who's the lucky lady, that was a microaggression. I was there I would call it a micro invalidation. There are three of them. There's a micro assault in which someone doesn't actually assault another person, but they may use a symbol or sign which connotes an assault, which somehow symbolizes an assault. So if I walk outside my house and I see a cross burning, no one beat me up, but it's a threat of an assault commonly associated with the Ku Klux Klan. And just around the corner from me, there was a cross burning like during the 1970s when people were integrating my area, right? So we have those micro assaults, cross burnings, which hopefully most of us are not engaging in. But even using a racial epithet like the N-word, okay, or BITCH or agenda, these are all
right? Sometimes someone is meaning to compliment another person, it seems, but they're really
insulting. So if I meet someone who has two Latin American parents and I say, oh my goodness, you speak English so well, it's an insult because I'm assuming that the person shouldn't speak English well because they have Latin American heritage. That's what we call a micro insult, which is a microaggression. It's this commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignity, which shows hostility towards a person due to a diversity dimension. And then we have the micro invalidation. When I look at you, I don't see color. Remember, we're interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. We want to see people's colors. We want to appreciate their colors. We want them to feel comfortable with respect to all aspects of their diversity. I'm going to come off a little. I want to stop sharing and I want to go into the chat. And I want to invite you all to please tell me, what are your thoughts on this before we go to the main part, which is what we are going to do. So the first step always is awareness, right? So now we're aware. We're aware that we are in a pickle to a certain extent. The history of institutional racism, the history of institutional biases have caused a great deal of lack of equity in our society. We've seen that. I particularly focused on race. We can create similar slides on gender. We can create similar slides on gender identity. We can create similar slides on sexual orientation. We can create similar slides on many of these different dimensions, right? And even within race, I focused on Black versus white because there's just tons of data on that. But we could also do, white versus Latin American, white versus Asian American, and we could figure out exactly what's going on from an equity perspective. So we've already discussed these institutional problems. But then we said, hey, let's not wash our hands and say, oh my goodness, these are institutional problems. I have nothing to do with it. Let's also look in the mirror and say, hey, we all have our own biases. And in our everyday interactions, we very often are revealing that bias through our words and actions. And this is something that I would like to tell you. we can apologize. We will make mistakes that show bias, but thankfully we can apologize. We should not silence our communication in order to ensure that we don't make mistakes. That's the wrong approach. We want to go ahead and make mistakes and apologize. And I would say that 95% of the time, people will judge you on your intentions. Okay? All right, so let's move on and talk about what we are doing in terms of seizing our power. And I really want to get some more commentary from you because we only have about 5 minutes left, right? So clearly, when it comes to the institutional aspects of racism and sexism and homophobia, we all can do work by voting. And there are certain organizations such as the NAACP that actually do report cards on public officials and say, how have their policies or the policies that they voted for, that they've endorsed, that they've backed, impacted certain communities, right? So seizing our power, voting. We all should feel as if there's no way that we sit home during election. Also, we advocate, right? So here's a slide about elected officials, right? So we want to make sure that we are actually contacting our elected officials about what it is that they need to do, that we need to do in order to improve our situation as a nation as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Volunteer, right? So for example, I'm an attorney. I may engage in pro bono legal work on issues of racial justice. Some of you who are there may not be attorneys, but you may be accountants and you may do VITA, right? I forget voluntary tax assistance, right? In order to help people who are impoverished, make sure that they get the best refund that they can, right? So it could be pro bono legal work. It could be pro bono accounting work. All of you have the ability to volunteer because you come to the table with diverse skill sets. Patronize, right? So very often, we're talking about racial justice as it relates to Black and white. They're Black-owned restaurants, Etsy shops, they're large MWBEs, minority women business enterprises, MWBEs. Some of you may be making decisions with respect to what vendors your organization supports, and you can choose women-owned vendors, right? MWBE, minority women business enterprise. You will be able to look for that information. Are you a woman-owned business? Are you a minority-owned business? You can certainly do that. Uber Eats literally has a section called Black owned. And you can try that delicious soul food or Caribbean food or, seafood or whatever food it might be that's from a restaurant and say, hey, I'm going to support a diverse community. There are Etsy shops that are also labeled women-owned business, Latina-owned business, Latin American-owned business, Latinx-owned business. You can do this. I've gone on Etsy and looked this up. Donate. Right? There are plenty of organizations that you can donate to that are devoted to racial justice. And then, of course, within your own company, you can recruit. You can certainly do a phenomenal job of recruiting diverse individuals. You can make sure and you can speak to, like some people send me emails and they say, oh, how is it that I can find diverse talent? You need to make sure that you're going outside of your bubble, right? And that you're using diverse resources for recruiting. Next, mentor. Are there formal and informal mentoring programs at your nonprofit or at your organization, which will allow you to include someone? Like, oh my goodness, sometimes as a mentor can do something as simple as, oh, you're going out to lunch with someone and you bring your mentee in so they have that feeling of inclusion. And then, of course, in your everyday speaking with respect to microaggressions, you're trying your best to be mindful. Again, you do not halt your speech. You're working on being mindful. So we have about a minute left. We've gone through most of our slides. Thank you so much for your patience. I want to go in and see a question. Speaking of the N-word, I've met a number of men from the islands who use it frequently. On the surface, it might be easy to say, I can call myself what I want, but don't others call me what the name is. If there's something deeper going on. So Sean, we could literally debate about this, all day, all night, and twice on Sundays. So I am of the opinion that it's a derogatory term, whether used among people of African descent or used outside. So there are two branches of thought. Some people say that by using it themselves, they're reclaiming it and they're taking away the tinge of hatred that originally went with it. That's what they're saying. Others are saying, no, there's no way that it can be reappropriated. It is all bad. I would say I would recommend we don't speak about it. We don't use that language. All right. So my time is over. I don't know whether you've been kicked out, but it says session ends at now. So I thank you all for your time. I don't know if you're still there or whether you've been kicked out. I'm putting my email address in the chat. I'm at milestales.com. I'm putting my phone number in the chat. I am here. I'm a resource for you. We're currently consulting and doing training programs for many nonprofits. So I thank you so much for your time. And I think that we need to continue this conversation. So thank you again. Thank you again. Oh, great. Some people are still there. I'm going to leave my contact information as the last slide. You can take a picture of it and hopefully we can continue this conversation. So there it is. That is my contact information. And I hope that we'll keep in touch. You have my contact information. Take a picture of it. We can continue this conversation. I'm very excited about the work that I'm doing with nonprofits. As I mentioned before, I'm on a large consulting project with two geoscience organizations, and I'm finding that work incredibly fulfilling. I've been working with CUNY Law for some time, very fulfilling work. So I appreciate you all as nonprofits. I like what you do, and I'm so incredibly grateful to be of service and to work with you all. Until we meet again, goodbye, everyone. Goodbye.